The fluorescent lights in the Sterling and Associates conference room buzzed with that particular frequency that always reminded me of a wasp trapped against glass. Fitting, really, considering how often I felt trapped in these meetings. I adjusted my blazer, navy blue, conservative, professional, and opened my leather portfolio to the spreadsheets I'd prepared the night before. My name is Charlotte Williams. I'm 32 years old. I have an MBA from Northwestern and 7 years of experience in corporate restructuring. I've saved 3 companies from bankruptcy and generated over $40 million in recovered assets for this firm. None of that seemed to matter when I walked into a room full of white men who'd already decided what I was before I opened my mouth. "All right, let's get started," said Gerald Morrison, senior partner. He was 63, silver-haired, and had the kind of tan that only comes from golf courses and Caribbean vacations. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He never did. "We're here to discuss the Whitmore Industries acquisition. Tom, what do you have for us?" Tom Brennan stood up. He was 45, red-faced from the 3 martini lunches he pretended didn't happen, and had been with the firm for 15 years. He'd also been passed over for senior partner twice, a fact that made him particularly vicious toward anyone he perceived as competition. "I've been analyzing the Whitmore portfolio," Tom began, clicking to his first slide. My stomach dropped. Those were my numbers, my analysis. The same spreadsheets I'd submitted to Gerald 2 weeks ago, now branded with Tom's name in the corner. I kept my face neutral. I'd learned that lesson early. Any display of emotion would be labeled aggressive or difficult. I watched as Tom stumbled through the presentation, mispronouncing amortization and clearly not understanding the debt restructuring timeline I'd created. "Excellent work, Tom," Gerald said when he finished. "Very thorough." I raised my hand. "If I may, I have some additional insights on the Whitmore projections." Gerald sighed. It was barely perceptible. But I caught it. I always did. "Charlotte, we're on a tight schedule today. It'll just take a moment. The debt-to-equity ratio in slide 7 is actually miscalculated. If we proceed with that number, we're looking at a potential liability exposure of... I think Tom knows his own numbers. Charlotte." This from Derek Hughes, junior partner, who had graduated law school 3 years after me, but had somehow leapfrogged into a corner office. He gave me that smile, the one that said he was being reasonable, that I was the one causing problems. "Let's not derail the meeting." I opened my mouth to respond, but Tom cut me off. "Charlotte, maybe you could take notes for us? We'll need someone to type up the minutes." The room was silent. 6 white men in expensive suits, looking at me expectantly. I was the only black person in the room, the only woman, and they wanted me to take notes. I could feel my pulse in my temples. The rage was there. It was always there, but I'd learned to hold it deep in my chest where no one could see it. Instead, I smiled. "Of course, Tom. I'd be happy to." I wrote down every word they said that day. After the meeting, I returned to my office, not a corner office, despite my seniority and performance reviews, but a small interior space next to the supply closet. I closed the door and sat in the dark for exactly 3 minutes. That was my ritual. 3 minutes to feel everything I couldn't show them. 3 minutes of rage, grief, and exhaustion. Then I turned on the light and got back to work. My office phone rang. "Charlotte Williams speaking." "Charlie, it's Marcus." Marcus Chen was the only other person of color in the partner track, a second-generation Chinese-American who'd been with the firm for 12 years. We had an unspoken alliance, the kind that forms when you're both swimming in the same shark tank. "You okay? I heard about the meeting." News travels fast. Derek was in the break room bragging about how he kept things on track when you tried to take over. His words. I closed my eyes. My analysis. Tom presented my analysis as his own work. "I know. I saw your preliminary report last month." Marcus paused. "You should report it." "To whom?" "Gerald? He was in the room. He knows exactly what happened." "HR, then." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, I've filed 3 HR complaints in 2 years. You know what happened? Nothing. Well, no, something happened. I got labeled as not a team player on my last performance review. This is different. This is intellectual property theft. It's only theft when they decide to see it that way. I pulled up my computer and started a new spreadsheet. I'm not going to fight them on their terms anymore. That's a game I can't win. So what are you going to do? I stared at my screen, at the columns of numbers that represented other people's fortunes and failures. I'm going to do what I always do, my job, perfectly, and I'm going to pay very close attention. That night, I stayed late. I'd been doing that a lot lately, not because I needed to, but because the office revealed things after hours that it kept hidden during the day. People got careless. Conversations happened in hallways. Printers spit out documents that nobody remembered to collect. At 8:47 p.m., I walked past Gerald's office on my way to the restroom. His door was cracked open, and I heard voices. Can't keep giving her the complex cases if she's going to cause problems. That was Gerald. She's technically our best analyst. Derek's voice. Technically. Gerald laughed. But clients don't want to see... Look, I'm not being racist, I'm being practical. The Whitmore family is old money, Southern old money. They're not going to be comfortable with someone like her leading their restructuring. Someone like her. Derek repeated it without irony. You know what I mean. It's not about her qualifications. It's about optics. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand pressed against the wall. I'd known, of course. I'd always known. But hearing it spoken so plainly, so casually, it still felt like a blade between my ribs. So what do we do? Derek asked. Keep her on the small accounts. Let Tom and Bradley handle Whitmore. We'll give her credit as support staff. Keeps her busy, keeps her quiet. I walked back to my office on legs that didn't feel like my own. I sat down at my desk and opened a new document. For a long time, I just stared at the blank page. Then I started writing. I wrote down everything I'd heard. I added it to the other notes I'd been keeping. Every slight, every stolen idea, every time I'd been passed over or pushed aside. I created a folder on my personal drive and named it Insurance. At 10:30 p.m., I was still at my desk when the cleaning crew came through. Maria, who'd worked the night shift for 6 years, paused at my door. Miss Charlotte, you work too hard. I smiled at her. I could say the same about you, Maria. Me, I have no choice. She shrugged. But you're smart. You should be running this place. Maybe someday. Maybe sooner than they think. Maria winked and moved on to the next office. I thought about her words as I gathered my things to leave. She was right about one thing. I was smart. Smart enough to know that fighting them directly would only destroy me. But there were other ways. Legal ways. Ways that lived in the fine print they never expected someone like me to read. I pulled up the firm's employee handbook on my computer. Then the partnership agreement. Then the client contracts. The templates, at least. The ones I had access to. I started reading. Somewhere in these documents was a thread I could pull. A clause, a provision, a loophole. Something they'd overlooked because they never imagined someone in my position would be looking. I found it at 2:17 a.m. Section 14, subsection C of the partnership agreement, intellectual property and attribution rights. It was dense legal language, buried in boilerplate, but the meaning was clear. Any work product created by a firm employee remained attributable to that employee for purposes of professional credit, regardless of how it was subsequently presented or distributed. More importantly, Section 14C was linked to Section 23B, breach of fiduciary duty. If a partner was found to have misattributed work product for personal gain, it constituted grounds for review by the Ethics Board, and potential dissolution of partnership status. Tom Brennan had just committed a Section 14C violation in front of 6 witnesses. But I needed more than one incident. I needed a pattern. I needed proof they couldn't dismiss or explain away. I saved the documents to my insurance folder and finally headed home. In my car, I called Marcus. "It's almost 3 a.m, he mumbled. "I know. I found something." "Found what?" I smiled in the darkness. The thread. The next 3 weeks were an exercise in patience. I continued doing my job flawlessly, finishing projects ahead of schedule, exceeding targets, never giving them a single legitimate complaint. But I also started paying attention in ways I never had before. I documented every meeting where my contributions were dismissed or attributed to someone else. I noted dates, times, witnesses. I saved copies of my original work with timestamps. I created a comprehensive record of the discrimination I faced, not to file another useless HR complaint, but to build something larger. And I watched. I watched Tom submit another report that borrowed heavily from my methodology. I watched Derek take credit for a client save I'd engineered. I watched Gerald assign the Whitmore account to a team that didn't include me, despite my expertise being directly relevant. Each incident went into my file. Each incident was another thread in the rope they were unknowingly weaving around their own necks. Then came the quarterly review. "Charlotte, please sit down." Gerald gestured to the chair across from his massive mahogany desk. His office had windows on 2 sides, looking out over downtown. Mine didn't have windows at all. "Thank you for meeting with me," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'll get right to it. Your performance this quarter has been adequate. Adequate. I'd outperformed every other analyst in the firm by a margin of 37%. I'd brought in 2 new clients entirely on my own initiative. I'd worked 60-hour weeks without complaint. "I see," I said. "However, there have been some concerns about your interpersonal dynamics." Gerald leaned back in his chair. "Several team members have mentioned that you can be, how do I put this, difficult to work with. Can you give me specific examples?" "It's more of a general feeling. A sense that you're not fully integrated with the team culture." "I understand." I kept my face pleasant. "Is there anything specific I can work on to improve?" Gerald looked almost disappointed that I wasn't arguing. He'd probably prepared a whole speech about professional conduct and team harmony. "Just try to be more of a team player, less combative." "Of course. I appreciate the feedback." I stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Gerald, one quick question. The Whitmore restructuring, I noticed my preliminary analysis was incorporated into the final presentation. Should I expect attribution in the client communications?" Gerald's face flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been alarm. "That's really more of Tom's domain. Talk to him about the details." "I will. Thank you." I walked out of his office and added verbal confirmation of awareness to my notes. Gerald had just acknowledged that he knew my work was in that presentation. He'd just implicated himself. The rope was getting tighter. 6 weeks after my conversation with Gerald, the Whitmore deal fell apart. I heard about it the way I heard about most things. Standing outside a closed door, invisible to the men inside who assumed they were alone. Tom's voice was panicked. The debt restructuring timeline was completely wrong. "Whitmore's pulling out of the agreement." "How is that possible?" Derek demanded. "You said you had the numbers." "I did have the numbers. I don't know what went wrong." I knew what went wrong. The analysis Tom had stolen from me was preliminary, a first draft based on incomplete data. I'd revised it significantly before submitting my final version. Corrections that Tom never saw because he'd grabbed the first document he found with my name on it. He'd built his entire presentation on a foundation of errors. And now those errors were costing the firm one of its biggest clients. I returned to my desk and waited. Within an hour, I was summoned to the main conference room. Gerald, Tom, Derek, and 2 other partners sat around the table like a tribunal. Their faces were hard. "Charlotte, we need to discuss the Whitmore situation," Gerald began. "Of course. How can I help?" "Tom tells us that the preliminary analysis you provided contained significant errors." I felt the room shift. Felt the target being painted on my back. They were going to blame me. Of course they were. That was always the plan. Whether they'd articulated it or not. Use my work when it was convenient. Blame me when things went wrong. But I was ready. "I'm sorry. I'm confused," I said calmly. "I wasn't assigned to the Whitmore account. My name isn't on any of the official project documentation." Tom's face reddened. You know damn well your analysis was the basis for… Tom. Gerald's voice was sharp. Let's keep this professional. I'd like to understand the accusation, I continued. Are you saying that my preliminary research, which was never finalized or approved for client use, was incorporated into a presentation without my knowledge or consent? Silence. The other partners exchanged glances. Because if that's the case, I said, I have some concerns about how our intellectual property protocols were followed. Gerald's jaw tightened. That's not the issue here. Isn't it? Section 14C of the partnership agreement is quite clear about work product attribution. If unauthorized use of my preliminary analysis led to errors in a client presentation, that would seem to be a significant compliance issue. More silence. I could see them recalculating, realizing that I wasn't the easy target they'd assumed. Let's take a step back, Derek said, attempting to smooth things over. Obviously, there's been some miscommunication. Charlotte, why don't you help us fix the Whitmore numbers? Get us back on track. I'd be happy to. I'll just need official documentation of my involvement in the project, appropriate credit in all client communications, and confirmation that this will be reflected in my quarterly review. Charlotte, Gerald started. I'm just following protocol, I said sweetly. Section 12A, Project Documentation Requirements. I'm sure we all want to make sure this is handled properly. The meeting ended without resolution, but something had shifted. They looked at me differently now, not with respect exactly, but with a new wariness. They'd tried to trap me, and I'd walked out with my head high. That night, Marcus met me for drinks at a bar far from the office. I heard about the meeting, he said. The whole firm's talking about it. Good things, I'm sure. You scared them. Marcus shook his head. I've never seen Gerald back down like that. I didn't do anything except cite the rules they wrote. That's what scared them. He raised his glass. To knowing the rules better than the people who made them. I clinked my glass against his. I'm not done yet. I figured. He studied me. You have a plan. I have the beginning of one. Over the next month, I executed my strategy with precision. First, I demanded, in writing, that my preliminary analysis be officially stricken from the Whitmore project records, since it had never been authorized for use. This forced the firm to document the unauthorized appropriation. Second, I requested a formal review of all projects where my work had been incorporated without attribution. This triggered an internal audit, standard procedure under Section 16D, which I'd found buried in the compliance manual. Third, I continued doing exceptional work. I closed 3 accounts in 30 days, bringing in over $2 million in fees. I made sure every interaction was documented, every success attributed. But the real strategy was quieter. I started building relationships with people the partners overlooked. The administrative staff, the paralegals, the IT department. These were the people who actually knew how the firm operated, who saw things the executives never noticed. Maria, my nighttime ally from the cleaning crew, became an unexpected source of information. Mr. Morrison, he throws away many papers, she told me one evening. Important papers. I'm not supposed to look, but you notice things. She nodded. I notice everything. What she noticed, and what she quietly passed along to me over the following weeks, was a pattern of behavior that went far beyond stolen presentations. Gerald Morrison had been systematically destroying documentation of client complaints, particularly complaints related to discriminatory treatment. 3 Black clients had raised concerns about the firm's handling of their accounts over the past 2 years. All 3 complaints had been resolved internally, meaning they'd been buried. The resolution letters, which should have been filed permanently, had ended up in Gerald's personal shredder. But Maria had pulled some of them before they were destroyed. She didn't know what they said. Her English wasn't strong enough for legal documents, but she'd recognized that they looked important. When she showed them to me, I had to set them down and take a breath. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about a pattern of institutional racism that had affected clients, employees, and probably countless others who'd never had the chance to speak up. I made copies of everything. Then I started researching. The firm's primary client was Hendricks Financial, a major investment bank that prided itself on its diversity initiatives. Hendricks had been in the news recently for commitments to racial equity in their vendor relationships. They'd publicly announced that they would review partnerships with any organization found to engage in discriminatory practices. Sterling and Associates derived 63% of their revenue from Hendricks Financial. I started drafting a letter. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the office grew increasingly tense. Tom had been reprimanded for the Whitmore disaster. Not fired, of course, but moved to a less prestigious account. He blamed me openly, in meetings, in emails, in hallway conversations. "She set me up," I overheard him telling Derek. "She gave me bad numbers on purpose." "Can you prove that?" Derek asked. "I don't need to prove it. Everyone knows what she is." Everyone knows what she is. I wrote it down. I added it to my file. The quarterly performance reviews came around again. This time, I was rated meets expectations, a significant upgrade from adequate, though still far below what my actual performance warranted. "I've noticed some improvements in your teamwork," Gerald told me, as if he were rewarding a child for good behavior. "Thank you," I said. "I've been focusing on understanding the firm's operations more thoroughly." "Well, keep it up," I smiled. "I intend to." The next piece of my plan required precision timing. Hendricks Financial had their annual vendor review meeting in April, 2 months away. All of their primary partners, including Sterling and Associates, would be evaluated for contract renewal. I needed to ensure that certain information reached the right people before that meeting, but I couldn't be the one to deliver it. If I came forward directly, they'd paint me as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. The accusations would be about my character, not their conduct. So I created a paper trail instead. Anonymous tips to the right journalists. Carefully redacted documents showing patterns of discrimination. Nothing that could be traced back to me, but everything pointing to verifiable facts. The story broke in early March. Major law firm accused of systematic discrimination. Internal documents reveal pattern of buried complaints. The article named Sterling and Associates. It quoted former clients who'd finally felt safe coming forward. It referenced the destroyed documentation, though not where the copies had come from. And it mentioned, almost in passing, that the firm's largest client was currently evaluating whether to continue the partnership. I was in my office when the news broke. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Did you see?" I saw. For the first 2 days, the firm tried to suppress the story. Gerald issued a statement calling the allegations baseless and clearly the work of a disgruntled individual. But more former employees started coming forward. And then came the document that I'd been waiting for, the one I'd planted most carefully. It was a memo from Gerald Morrison to the HR director, dated 18 months earlier. In it, Gerald explicitly instructed that complaints from certain demographics be handled with additional discretion to avoid creating documentation that could be problematic later. That memo was authentic. I'd found it in a file Gerald thought he'd deleted, but nothing is ever truly deleted when you have friends in IT. The day after the memo was leaked, Hendricks Financial announced they were pausing their relationship with Sterling and Associates pending a full investigation. 63% of the firm's revenue. On hold. I walked into the office that morning to find the partners in an emergency meeting. Through the glass conference room walls, I could see Gerald's face. Red, sweating, terrified. Tom was shouting something. Derek had his head in his hands. For the first time in 7 years, I felt something that might have been hope. But I wasn't finished yet. The final act began on a Wednesday morning in April. I received an email from the firm's general counsel requesting my presence at an urgent meeting regarding recent developments. The location wasn't the usual conference room. It was the executive boardroom on the top floor, the one with the view of the entire city. I dressed carefully that morning. My best suit, a sharp charcoal gray that I'd bought with my first bonus and saved for important occasions. My natural hair, which I'd been straightening for years to appear more professional, I left in its full, beautiful coils. My grandmother's pearls around my neck. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had nothing left to hide. The boardroom held more people than I expected. Gerald and the other senior partners sat at one end of the massive table. At the other end were 3 people I didn't recognize, 2 women and a man, all in suits that screamed outside counsel. And in the center, looking distinctly uncomfortable, sat Harold Hendricks III himself, the CEO of Hendricks Financial. Gerald's face when I walked in was something I'll treasure forever. He'd been expecting someone else, anyone else. "Charlotte," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Please sit down." I took the chair at the far end of the table, directly across from Mr. Hendricks. "I'll get right to the point," said one of the outside counsels, a black woman about my age, who gave me the slightest nod of recognition. "My name is Patricia Santos. I represent Hendricks Financial in their ongoing review of this firm's practices. Mr. Hendricks requested this meeting to discuss certain documentation that has recently come to our attention." Gerald interrupted. "I want to state clearly that this firm denies any wrongdoing." "Gerald, Mr." Hendricks's voice was quiet but carried weight. "Let's hear what she has to say." Patricia opened a folder. "Over the past several weeks, we've received anonymous documentation of systematic discrimination at Sterling & Associates. This documentation includes destroyed complaint files, memos instructing staff to suppress certain records, and a pattern of intellectual property theft targeting employees of color." She looked at me. "Ms. Williams, you've been at this firm for 7 years. During that time, you've filed 3 official complaints about discrimination. Would you like to tell us what happened with those complaints?" I took a breath. "They were dismissed. I was told I was being oversensitive and not a team player. After my 2nd complaint, I was passed over for promotion. After my 3rd, I was moved to a smaller office and excluded from major accounts. Can you give specific examples of the discrimination you experienced?" "Yes." I opened my own folder, the one I'd been building for years. On March 15th of last year, Tom Brennan presented my analysis of the Whitmore Industries portfolio as his own work. Gerald Morrison was present and did not object. Afterward, Gerald told Tom, and I quote, "Clients don't want to see someone like her leading their restructuring." Gerald's face went white. "That's completely—" "I have 6 witnesses," I said calmly, and I recorded the conversation. The room went silent. Recording without consent was illegal in some states, but we were in a one-party consent jurisdiction. I'd checked. Patricia made a note. "Continue, please," I continued. For the next 45 minutes, I laid out every incident I'd documented, every stolen idea, every past promotion, every microaggression and overt act of racism. I had dates, times, witnesses, and in several cases recordings. But the most damaging part came at the end. "Finally," I said, "I'd like to address the matter of Section 14C of Sterling & Associates Partnership Agreement." Gerald looked confused. Tom looked terrified. "Section 14C establishes that work product attribution violations constitute a breach of fiduciary duty," I continued. "Such breaches, under Section 23B, are grounds for dissolution of partnership status." I pulled out another document. "I've identified 17 instances in the past 2 years where my work was presented under someone else's name. In each case, the presenting partner was aware that the work was not their own. In each case, the misattribution resulted in professional benefit for the presenting partner, bonuses, promotions, client relationships, that should rightfully have been mine." Patricia leaned forward. "Are you saying that multiple partners have committed actionable breaches under the firm's own governing documents?" "Yes. And under the partnership agreement, such breaches require a full ethics review. If the review confirms the violations, the affected partners must forfeit their partnership stakes." Gerald stood up so fast his chair fell over. "This is absurd. You can't—" "Section 23B, paragraph 4, I said, without raising my voice. "Any partner may request an ethics review upon presentation of documented evidence of breach. The request must be honored within 30 days. I slid a formal request across the table. Consider this my request." Mr. Hendricks had been silent throughout my presentation, Now he spoke. Gerald, I've known you for 20 years. I've trusted this firm with billions of dollars in business. He shook his head slowly. And you've been running it like a plantation. Gerald sputtered. Harold, that's not... I've heard enough. Mr. Hendricks stood. As of this moment, Hendricks Financial is terminating our relationship with Sterling and Associates. We'll be transferring all active matters to new counsel within 30 days. 63% of the firm's revenue, gone with a single sentence. But Mr. Hendricks wasn't finished. He walked around the table to where I sat. Ms. Williams, I've read your analysis work. The Whitmore projections, the real ones. Not the version that was presented. You're extraordinary. Thank you, sir. Hendricks Financial is restructuring our legal team. We need someone to lead our new compliance division. Someone who understands both the law and the human cost of getting it wrong. He held out his hand. The job is yours if you want it. I stood and shook his hand. I'd be honored. Gerald's voice came from behind me, desperate now. Charlotte, wait. We can work this out. The firm needs you. I turned to face him. 7 years of rage and grief and exhaustion crystallized into perfect crystalline calm. Gerald, let me tell you what's going to happen. The ethics review will proceed. Based on the evidence, at least 4 partners will lose their stakes, including you and Tom. The firm will likely have to restructure, probably under new leadership. Several former employees and clients will file civil suits, which will settle for significant amounts, and your name will be attached to all of it. I picked up my folder. You spent 7 years trying to make me invisible. You told yourselves I didn't belong, that I wasn't qualified, that clients wouldn't accept me. You stole my work and called it yours. You destroyed complaints and buried evidence. I smiled. But you forgot one thing. I was in every meeting. I read every document. I knew every clause and provision in every agreement this firm ever signed. You were so busy underestimating me that you never noticed I was paying attention. I walked toward the door, then paused. Also, I'm keeping the office supplies. Maria was waiting in the hallway. She'd heard everything through the door, and her face was wet with tears. Miss Charlotte, she whispered. You did it. I hugged her. We did it, Maria. Your evidence made this possible. What happens now? Now I start my new job, and you... I pulled an envelope from my pocket. The first thing I'm doing at Hendricks is hiring my own staff. I need someone I trust to manage my office, someone who notices everything. Maria's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a job offer with a salary 4 times what she made cleaning offices. I can't, she started. You can. You deserve this, Maria. You always have. 2 months later, I sat in my new corner office at Hendricks Financial headquarters. The view was better than Gerald's had ever been. The Sterling and Associates ethics review had concluded the previous week. Gerald Morrison, Tom Brennan, and Derek Hughes had all been stripped of their partnerships. The firm was in bankruptcy proceedings. A class action lawsuit from former employees of color was moving forward, and early indications suggested significant settlements. My phone buzzed. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. I heard you got another promotion, he said. Executive Vice President of Compliance, youngest in company history. And the first black woman. Also that. How does it feel? I looked out my window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Gerald Morrison was probably updating his resume. Tom Brennan was facing a bar complaint. Derek Hughes had reportedly left the country. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the 37 former Sterling employees who'd reached out to thank me. The policies I was implementing that would protect future workers from what I'd experienced. The young black woman I'd hired last week who reminded me of myself at 25, all brilliance and fire and determination. It feels like a beginning, I said. After I hung up, I opened my laptop to the document I'd been working on. A comprehensive guide to identifying and documenting workplace discrimination. Written for anyone who found themselves where I'd been. I was going to publish it. Make it available for free. They'd tried to silence me by making me invisible. Instead, They'd given me 7 years to learn their systems, their weaknesses, their blind spots. They'd handed me the ammunition and assumed I was too stupid to use it. My grandmother used to say that the longest road out is the longest road in. I'd walked that road for 7 years. I'd documented every step. And when I finally reached the end, I hadn't just escaped. I'd burned the path behind me so no one would have to walk it again. I thought about the woman I'd been on that first day at Sterling and Associates. Young, hopeful, convinced that excellence would be enough. That woman had been naive, but she'd also been right about one thing. She was good enough. She'd always been good enough. The world just needed to be forced to see it. I turned back to my laptop and kept writing. There was so much work left to do. But for the first time in 7 years, I was doing it on my own terms. And that made all the difference.